Good morning, everybody. New day, new room that I'm reading in, new chapter to read. Chapter 3, a delightful evening. Our audience would be here any minute. We madly folded the remaining stack of programs, except for Florence, who preferred to shadow her brother. Roddy Fusswell was precise in directing his helpers as to where the tray should go, the angle at which to place the dainty serviettes, and where the milk jug and sugar bowl must stand in proximity to the tea urn. "Go away," he whispered to Florence, which Lavinia seemed to think was hilarious. Florence swiped a lemon tart and crammed it into her mouth before Roddy could stop her. He clamped his fingers around her wrist as she chewed, squeezing so tightly that she began to sputter crumbs. "Ow!" she tugged, but her brother held on. "Let me go," she said, then, "Oh, dear," more loudly. "What is that on your face?" Roddy Fusswell glared at Florence as if she were a slug on a plate of biscuits. He released his grip, and one of those hands slid upward to check. "Oh," she said, "I thought it was a fuzzy yellow millipede, but now I see it's your attempt to grow a mustache." Lavinia snorted. Roddy looked as if he might tip the tea urn over his sister's head, but Miss Mary Ann put a hand on Florence's shoulder. "This evening is about befriending," she said. "Have we not heard enough harsh words for one night? I am at the end of my tether with unpleasant relations." Coming in now was the Reverend Mr. Teasdale, vicar of All Saints Church, accompanied by his dour wife. Dour means like sour, like a poopy head, like just that's not a real word, but you know. Mr. Teasdale would shepherd donations from the mermaid room to the needy families. Indeed, he ceremoniously placed his own contribution, a woolly red cardigan, on top of the offerings from Rose's drawers. He and Mrs. Teasdale took up positions nearby to direct further gifts. Lavinia and Florence were to give each family a program. Mummy arrived, looking very smart. Despite being still and mourning for Papa, she put a blue feather in her hat, exactly the color of her eyes. I've got to make that be quiet. She brought me a set of new pencils as a good luck present, wrapped with a velvet ribbon. The minutes until my recitation were whirling past at a dreadful speed. One moment we all waited in place, worried that no audience would appear. The next moment the room and donation boxes were half filled and the platters of tea cakes half empty. Only a few moments more and every chair was occupied. The boxes overflowed with a most peculiar collection of items from the about-to-be befriended immigrants and refugees. Would someone fleeing a turbulent homeland need a veiled hat covered with coral-colored chrysanthemums? Or a pair of tasseled patent leather pumps? Fortunately, there were also heaps of warm jumpers and knitted stockings, sturdy flannel trousers and tweed skirts. Dozens of the needy poor would have a warmer winter thanks to our concert. Miss Mary Ann gave us the signal to duck behind the curtain that hid the narrow pantry from the main studio. I squinted through the opening to keep watch. Miss Mary Ann turned down the gas lamps on the audience side of the room, leaving the empty stage bathed in a bright, expectant glow. A slim young man in a brown suit opened the door from the hallway with too much force. Just as the chatter subsided, everyone jumped a bit, turning to stare at the stranger. He raised his hands in apology, snatched off his hat, and took a place against the back wall. The girls beside me shivered in their dance tunics, breathing sugary breaths. Miss Mary Ann had forbidden fancy costumes, despite Florence Fusswell's protests, as this was a charitable performance, not a time to be frivolous or vain. The rehearsal tunics were the color of porridge. Mummy had agreed, as 10 months had passed since Papa's death, that I might put aside my mourning clothes and wear last year's Sunday dress. Grass green silk with a pleated skirt. It was a bit worn at the elbows, but I'd be facing forward, wouldn't I? Do you guys know what mourning clothes are? So it wasn't just in England. It was all over the world. It was a tradition that some people still follow, most people don't. But if someone in your family or close to you or someone that you love passes away, if they die, then you wear black for a certain period of time, all black. Like Miss Bouse could take her sweater off and be in mourning today. And a lot of times the women would even wear hats that had veils over their faces. And it was to let people know as soon as they saw them that they had just recently lost someone and were mourning, which means they were sad. That they were in mourning means that you are sad about the loss of someone and longing for someone that's gone. So nowadays, a lot of times people won't wear mourning clothes, but they might wear a black armband, or they might wear something on them that lets people know. And then some people don't do that at all. But it was a very, very prominent tradition in many places in the world, especially back in the beginning of the 1900s when this was written. So it had been 10 months, almost a full year. And different cultures had different amounts of time that you were supposed to be in mourning and wear clothes that way. But it sounds to me like her mummy had still worn black, but put a blue feather in her hat, which was kind of a big deal since she was in mourning still. And she had allowed her daughter, Aggie, to actually wear a green dress instead of be in her black mourning clothes. Okay, so that's what mourning means. Now, if I can remember where in the world I was. Okay, Charlotte had assured me that no one would notice her elbows, remember? I held my poetry notebook and wished the evening done with, imagined my dress on its hanger and myself beneath the covers of my bed. Good evening, my friends. Miss Marianne stood with Rose next to her. Thank you for joining us for this special gathering. She gestured toward the impressive assortment of donations. Together we have made life better for our new neighbors. Gentle applause rippled through the room. I believe that friendly foreigners have much to offer our community, said Miss Marianne. The determination and endurance of immigrants seeking a new home is inspiring to those of us who are fighting for a woman's right to have a say in the quality of her home as well. Oh, not this again, said Florence. Miss Marianne's favorite topic, votes for women. Because in the early 1900s, many places over the world, including England and the United States, women could not vote, okay? The day will come before these girls are grown when they will have a voice their mothers and aunts do not. That voice is called the vote. My father will make noise, said Lavinia. He says the ideal woman is a mute. Mute means not speaking. On cue, a loud harumphing in the audience came from Mr. Payne. Auntie, said Rose. Get on with it, said Mr. Payne, rather more loudly than was polite. Let's have the dancing girls. Lavinia's eyes were squeezed shut. Miss Marianne put an arm around Rose's shoulder and summoned a cheerful smile. I shall leave the preaching to Mr. Teasdale henceforth, she said. May I introduce my favorite niece? Your only niece, said Rose. And my star pupil, Miss Rose Eversham. People clapped and Mr. Roddy Fusswell whooped in the vulgar manner of a football fan. Rose, said Miss Marianne, will introduce the girls who follow in her footsteps. Thank you all for being here, said Rose. Let us show appreciation for the gracious contribution of flowers from Mrs. Morton's greenhouse and the delicious treats provided by the Royal Victoria Hotel. Another smattering of applause. Most of you knew and remember my father, Rose said. Captain Giles Eversham. May he rest in peace, which means he's also dead. He taught me that an important step in becoming an adult is learning to give instead of to receive. A sympathetic murmur ran through the audience. Mr. Teasdale nodded so vigorously that I expected to see his head topple off. Now that would be a colorful detail in the story, wouldn't it? Here she goes, writing her story. Wrenched from its perch, the dislodged cranium rolled to a stop next to Mrs. Teasdale's tightly laced boots. A geyser of blood erupted from the Reverend's stiff white collar and splurted heavenward. She has quite the imagination, doesn't she? Rose waved a hand at the brimming donation boxes. My father would be proud of us tonight. The listeners again began to clap. But Rose held up a hand. Please save your applause for the artists. As you see in your program, my aunt has arranged a dance to complement the music of Chopin. I pulled aside the curtain to let the dancers pass and held my breath as Miss Mary Ann sat upon the piano stool and began to play. The girls swayed on the stage like knobby saplings in a gusty breeze. The tip of Florence's tongue stuck out at the corner of her mouth. Lavinia perspired like a glass of iced lemonade on a summer day. I had an inkling that what was taught in the mermaid dance room was more rewarding for the dancers than for the audience. But applause came, whether deserved or not. Florence and Lavinia hurtled into the pantry. The dreaded moment had arrived. My stomach seemed to be full of walnut shells. "Your turn. Go on." Florence gave me a hefty shove. I was next to the piano, my mouth as dry as talcum powder. "And now," Rose's smile in a futile effort to bolster my courage, "we will hear a poem written especially for this occasion. Please welcome Miss Agatha Morton." The applause waited for me to begin. Rows of kindly faces, all eyes on me. Not the applause, the audience waited for me to begin. The ability to move my lips departed altogether. My fingers clenched my notebook so tightly that its cover was slightly damp. Mummy beamed in the second row with Charlotte next to her. Miss Mary Ann nodded from the side of the room, and the slim, bespectacled stranger at the back was writing in a notebook of his own. But a familiar pulsing in my ears confirmed that I would not be reading aloud this evening. I was icy cold and burning hot in alternating shivers. Mummy's smile faltered, and Charlotte's was gone altogether. Silently, I implored Rose to save me, and so she did. Rose, whom I now would love forever, stepped close and slid an arm about my shoulder. She gently extracted the notebook from my hand. "Change of plan," she said. "I shall have the honor of delivering the world's first reading of a poem entitled—" I mutely shook my head. I had failed to name the poem. "A New Work by Agatha Morton." I tiptoed over to stand near Miss Mary Ann, my eyes prickling with hot tears. She put a soothing hand on my shoulder as we listened. "You've left your troubled home behind," Rose began, "to seek new shelter far away. May strangers on the road be kind, and faith your guide along the way. Bravely you sailed landward, ho, facing peril with each tide. Your heart steadfast, your eyes aglow, we here await with arms." Okay, so I realized that my phone going off made you miss me reading the poem, so I'm going to read it for you again now. "You've left your troubled home behind," Rose began, "to seek new shelter far away. May strangers on the road be kind, and faith your guide along the way. Bravely you sailed landward, ho, facing peril with each tide. Your heart steadfast, your eyes aglow. We here await with arms held wide." Rose shot me a pleased grin and dramatically flung open her arms as the room rattled with applause. She put the notebook on top of the piano and held out both hands to me. I walked as gracefully as my wobbly legs could manage to join Rose and the dancers at center stage, willing myself not to faint. My ears buzzed through the final ovation, through Rose's affectionate pat and Miss Mary Ann's warm embrace, through Mummy's hug and Charlotte's bringing me a cup of fruit punch. "All you had to do was read, for goodness sake," whispered Florence. "Next time," I mumbled, praying that it be true. Florence glared and slurped her tea. The crowd was rapidly dispersing. Lavinia departed with her parents. Rose put the few remaining cakes and Anita biscuits into a tin from the pantry. Florence slumped, pouting in a chair, waiting for her brother to finish his duties. Mr. Roddy Fusswell stacked the cups and saucers, rinsed the creamers, and lined up sugar bowls, each imprinted with the gilt-edged crest of the Royal Victoria Hotel. He brushed crumbs from the tabletop into the path of Miss Mary Ann's broom. "Don't fling the crumbs about, young man," said Miss Mary Ann. "We've had a few furry visitors this fall as the weather gets colder, and I do not want them to feel welcome." Furry visitors. What is she referring to? "So sorry, Miss Eversham. I don't mention it to anyone, but it's the same up in the hotel. Mice nestling in for the winter." They're too clever to nibble any poison we leave out and go straight for the sugar stacks. I've tried everything, said Miss Mary Ann. I've got boxes of vermirid in the pantry, but the little rascals just keep coming back. I don't like the idea of traps. It's quicker, though, said Roddy. One sharp snap and ka-chick, a sound meant to be the dying breath of a mouse, like a guillotine. Ugh, said Rose. Perhaps you simply need to use more poison. Roddy Fusswell would return in the morning with his assistants to cart away the dishes and the tea urn. Leonard would fetch the splendid bouquets, and Mr. Teasdale's volunteers would lug their bounty to the basement of All Saints Church. All 4 newcomers now resident in Torquay were invited to come on Sunday after the morning service to make selection according to their needs. Miss Mary Ann was just finishing her sweep of the smooth wooden floor when the bespectacled stranger approached. In a low, husky voice, he introduced himself as Mr. Augustus Fibley, a reporter for the Torquay Voice. A reporter! I sidled closer, scooping up garments that had escaped from the donation boxes. Mr. Fibley was gathering facts for a notice in tomorrow morning's edition of the newspaper, he explained. Might he please take a program with him in order that her name be printed correctly? Oh, glory! An actual reporter had heard the world premiere of my poem. Miss Aggie? Charlotte held my coat so that I could slip my arms easily into the sleeves. I buttoned it slowly. The mermaid room was once again its dear, drab self after a brief transformation into a shimmering theater. How odd to think that I'd been struck catastrophically mute while my poetry had filled the room to grand acclaim. I had both failed and triumphed in the same moment. Miss, said Charlotte. Only one thing was missing from this being the perfect evening. Papa. He would have loved to be here. I pictured him with a beaming smile, head tilted, listening to every syllable. Perhaps he'd heard it all from heaven. Miss, called Charlotte again. I hurried to catch up. Leonard was here to fetch us in the pony cart. Belle neighed softly as we climbed aboard. Pulling on my gloves, I realized that I'd left my notebook behind. Not a big worry. I'd be back for my lesson in the morning. Whoever could imagine that a corpse would be waiting upon the same floorboards where my poem had just been read aloud. And now, before the next chapter, there is the article from the newspaper, and it says it was cut from the Torquay Voice Town Talk. A collection was made last evening of clothing and household items to benefit needy immigrants and refugees who now are living as our neighbors in Torquay. Ms. Mary Ann Eversham, proprietress and instructress of the Mermaid Dance Room, hosted an evening of entertainment and generosity. Students performed a dance arrangement and recited poetry created for the occasion. The pleasant gathering was supplied with fresh flowers and tasty refreshments from local benefactors. A.F. That stood for Augustus Fibley, right? I think there was a picture of good old Augustus. Yep. So let's see, have we we still haven't met the dog. We haven't met Granny Jane. We haven't met Inspector Locke. But we've met everyone else. Okay? All right, guys. Chapter 4 tomorrow.